The operating room smelled like antiseptic and metal. I remember standing outside the scrub sink, watching my hands under the water, counting to 30 the way they taught us in first year. The hallway was quiet at that hour. 4:45 in the morning, the kind of quiet that belongs to people who chose this life on purpose. I had chosen it on purpose. What I hadn't chosen was walking into Mercy General's cardiac unit that morning to find my father already there, standing at the nurse's station in his navy blazer, laughing with Dr. Fenwick like they were old friends at a golf club, which I suppose they were. He didn't see me right away. I saw him first. My father is Dr. Conrad Ashby. Not a Dr. Conrad Ashby. The Dr. Conrad Ashby. The Dr. Conrad Ashby cardiothoracic surgeon, Pioneer Award recipient. The man whose name is on the east wing of St. Wing, Clarence Hospital in Philadelphia. The man who appeared on the cover of Surgical Excellence Quarterly twice. Once in 1998, once in 2011. He keeps both framed in his study, next to his medical school diploma and a photograph of himself shaking hands with someone important I can never remember. He has one child. That's what he says at conferences, at dinners, at the kind of hospital galas where everyone wears the same black and pretends the auction is for charity and not networking. I have one child. My son Donovan, he's finishing his residency at Johns Hopkins. Donovan is 29. He's completing a family medicine residency. He's a good person. I say that without bitterness because it's true. My brother had nothing to do with what my father built in his name. I am 31. I completed my cardiothoracic fellowship 8 months ago. I was the chief resident at Northwestern. I published 3 papers during my training, one of which was cited in the New England Journal of Medicine. My father has never mentioned me at a conference. He has mentioned me at home, of course. Once when I was 14 and told him I wanted to be a surgeon, he set down his fork and looked at me the way you look at a child who said something embarrassing in public. "That's a hard life," he said, "especially for women. The hours alone, you do it," I said. "That's different." I didn't ask how. I think I already knew what he meant. I think I'd known for years, and the way children know things they haven't been given the vocabulary to name yet. I applied to medical school without telling him. I got in without his help, which I know because I never asked for it. He found out through my mother, who called him with the news like she was delivering something fragile. He said, "She'll figure out it's not for her." He said that when I started my surgery rotation. He said it again when I matched into cardiothoracic. He said it one final time when I told him I'd accepted a position at Mercy General, his hospital, technically, where he held a senior attending role and served on the credentialing committee. "Meredith," he said. He was the only person who called me by my full name. "This hospital runs on reputation. Don't make things awkward." I told him I wouldn't. I didn't. I started at Mercy General on a Tuesday in September. I kept my head down. I arrived early, left late, didn't speak unless spoken to in ways that mattered. I was good at that, the invisibility of it. I'd been practicing since I was 14. The other attendings were polite. A few were warm. Dr. Renata Okafor, the department chief, shook my hand on my first day and said, "I've read your work on mitral valve repair techniques. Impressive." I thought about that sentence for 3 days afterward. I replayed it in the shower, in the car, at the grocery store, not because I needed the validation. I was past that, or trying to be, but because it was so startlingly uncomplicated. No caveat, no "for someone your age" or "especially given" or any of the invisible asterisks that had followed every compliment I'd ever received from someone in my father's orbit. Just impressive. I kept it in my chest like a small, warm stone. The case that changed everything was a 62-year-old man named Mr. DeLuca. Aortic stenosis, calcified valve, Previous bypass 8 years prior that had left scar tissue complicating the field. High risk, the kind of case that gets presented at Morbidity and Mortality Conference regardless of outcome, because someone's going to learn something either way. Dr. Okafor assigned it to me. I found out my father had also been consulted by the patient's cardiologist independently as a second opinion on the same afternoon. I didn't know he'd be there when I walked into the pre-op conference room. He was sitting at the head of the table. He looked up when I came in, and something moved across his face that I had learned over 31 years to interpret correctly. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't pride. It was the specific practice blankness of a man deciding, in real time, how to handle a situation he hadn't anticipated. Dr. Bort Fenwick was there. 2 cardiology fellows, a nurse practitioner named Gwen, who I'd worked with twice and liked immediately, and my father. Dr. Ashby, said Dr. Fenwick, nodding at me. Then, turning to my father, you know each other? My father picked up his pen. She trained at Northwestern, he said. Not she's my daughter. Not I know her. Not even a glance in my direction after the sentence ended. Gwen looked at me. I looked at the whiteboard. I've reviewed the imaging, I said. I'd like to walk through my approach. I had been preparing that case for 9 days. This is the part people don't see. The part that doesn't exist in the room with the bright lights and the clean gowns and the moment when something works and everyone exhales. What exists before that is silence. It's your kitchen table at 11 at night with 3 different surgical atlases open and a cold cup of coffee and your own handwriting covering a yellow legal pad in diagrams that don't quite make sense yet. It's the weekend you drive to the university library because they have the surgical video archive, and you watch 12 hours of valve procedures, different surgeons, different approaches, the ones that went wrong and the ones that were almost beautiful. It's the morning you call Dr. Okafor and ask to talk through a technical concern, not because you're uncertain, but because you want to be certain in the way that holds up under pressure. I had done all of that. I walked through my plan in the conference room with the calm of someone who has been inside the problem for long enough that it no longer feels like a problem. It feels like a landscape you've memorized. You know where the ground slopes. You know where it gets uncertain. When I finished, there was a brief silence. My father said, "The approach to the calcified annulus concerns me." I said, "I'd be glad to address that." He said, "It's a difficult field. The exposure alone. I've accounted for the scar tissue from the prior bypass," I said. "I'd like to show you the imaging sequencing if that would help." Another silence. Different in quality from the first. Dr. Fenwick cleared his throat. "Walk us through it." I walked them through it. When I was done, my father said nothing. He wrote something on his notepad. He didn't look up. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday. The night before, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 22 minutes after my shift ended. Not because I was afraid of the surgery. I had stopped being afraid of the surgery, the way you stop being afraid of a road you've driven 100 times. You respect it, but the fear is gone, replaced by attention. I was sitting in my car because I had let myself feel, for 22 minutes, what I otherwise kept filed away in some back room of myself. The specific exhaustion of being accurate and being doubted anyway. Of knowing your work and watching someone look through you while you present it. Of having the word daughter nowhere in a room where it should have been the first word spoken. I let myself feel that. Then I drove home. I made eggs. I slept for 6 hours. I set my alarm for 4:15. The surgery took 4 hours and 40 minutes. I won't walk you through all of it because it would mean nothing without the training, without the anatomy, without the years of learning to read a heart, the way some people read faces. What I will tell you is that the moment the calcified valve came free and the replacement seated cleanly and the heart resumed on its own, that moment is not something I can adequately describe in any language I have. It is enough. It is always enough. Mr. DeLuca went to the ICU in stable condition. I updated his family in the waiting room. His wife held my hands in both of hers and said, "Thank you." Just that. She didn't need to say more. I walked back through the corridor toward the locker room. Gwen was coming the other direction. She stopped. "The chief wants to see you," she said. "Then the case went beautifully. Everyone's talking about it." "Everyone?" I said. She had a particular expression. Dr. Fenwick was in the gallery. He called Dr. Okafor from the scrub sink. I nodded. I kept walking. I found out 3 days later from Dr. Okafor herself, that my father had also been in the gallery. She told me over coffee in her office, the kind of small, casual mention that is not small, or casual at all. She said she'd run into him in the hall afterward and he'd said, "Her technique is sound." Her technique. Her. Not, my daughter, not, I taught her nothing and she learned everything anyway. Just the passive observation of competence, like a man reading a weather report about a place he's never been. I said, "Thank you for telling me." Dr. Okafor looked at me over her coffee mug for a moment. She had a way of being quiet that felt like listening. "You should know," she said, "that I'm putting your name forward for the Voss Fellowship Review Committee. It's a significant case selection panel. Annual cycle. The Voss Fellowship, named after Dr. Margaret Voss, who had been one of the first female cardiothoracic surgeons in the country. The committee selected the cases that trained the next generation. It was not a credential you applied for. It was one you were nominated to." I set down my coffee. "I'd be honored," I said. She nodded once, like the matter was settled. My father called me that Sunday. He never called on Sundays. Sundays were his golf mornings, followed by his ritual of reading journals in his study and not being disturbed. I almost didn't answer. "I answered," he said. "I heard about the Voss committee." I said, A pause. Renata moves fast when she sees something she wants to keep. I didn't say anything. "The DeLuca case," he said. "The technique on the annulus, where did you learn that?" "I developed it," I said, "based on a modification of a method published by a team in Toronto. I wrote about it in my fellowship thesis." Another pause. Longer this time. "I didn't read your thesis," he said. I knew that. He'd never mentioned it. I'd sent him a copy, a professional courtesy, nothing more, and received no response. "I know," I said. He said my name then. My full name, Meredith, the way he'd always said it, with the particular weight of a man who considers the naming of something an act of ownership. "You've done well," he said. It was the most he had ever given me. I thought about 14-year-old me at the dinner table, the dropped fork, the look. I thought about the conference rooms and the blank face in the "She trained at Northwestern." I thought about a woman in a waiting room holding my hands and saying thank you like I had given her back the world, which in some way I had. "I know," I said again, and I meant something different by it. The Voss committee convened for the first time in February. There were 7 of us around the table, attendings, researchers, 2 senior fellows. We spent 4 hours reviewing case submissions for the next fellowship cycle. At one point, Dr. Scalpel, Okafor looked down the table at me and asked for my read on a technically complex submission from a candidate in Boston. I gave it. Clearly, specifically, without hedging. Everyone wrote notes. Afterward, one of the senior researchers, a woman named Dr. Fabiola Restrepo, whom I'd admired for years from a distance, stopped me in the hallway. "You should be writing more," she said. "Your clinical instincts are publishable." "You know that?" I told her I had a paper in progress. "Finish it," she said, like it was simple. It was, I realized. It was simple, not easy. Nothing about this life is easy, but simple. You do the work. You do it well, you finish it. My father and I have not discussed that Sunday phone call again. We see each other occasionally at the hospital, in hallways, at grand rounds, Twice at department events where we stood on opposite sides of the room and spoke to other people, he nods when he sees me. I nod back. It is a perfectly civil exchange between two professionals who know each other. I am not waiting for more than that anymore. This is the part I want to say clearly, because I think it matters. I spent years, quietly, privately, in the way you carry something you haven't named yet, waiting for a door to open that I eventually had to understand was never going to open, not because I wasn't worthy of it, because the person holding it had decided long ago, based on nothing more than the accident of my gender, that I was not worth the effort of changing his mind. And then I stopped waiting. I didn't stop loving him. Exactly. That's more complicated than I have clean language for. But I stopped organizing my life around the axis of his approval. I stopped measuring my accomplishments by whether they would register on some internal scale he carried around without my knowledge. I did the work because the work is worth doing. I do it at 4:45 in the morning, when the hallways are quiet and my hands smell like antiseptic and metal, and there is nothing in the world except the task in front of me and what I know. I do it for Mr. DeLuca's wife, who held my hands in both of hers. I do it for the candidate in Boston whose submission I reviewed for 4 hours and advocated for because the technique was sound and the thinking was clear, and someone needed to say so plainly, in a room where it counted. I do it for the version of myself that sat at a dinner table at 14 and didn't yet have the words. She knew something, that girl. She knew it even then, before she had the evidence, before she had the record, before anyone in any conference room had written anything in any notepad. She knew she belonged. She was right. A few weeks ago, I finished the paper Dr. Restrepo told me to finish. I submitted it to JAMA Surgery on a Wednesday evening. Then I closed my laptop, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window for a while, looking at nothing in particular. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother Donovan. Mom told me about the Voss thing. Congrats, Mary. Seriously. I smiled. I texted back a simple thank you. Then I finished the wine, washed the glass, and went to bed. I had an early surgery in the morning. I always do. I've thought a lot about cause and effect. Not in any mystical sense, just the plain, observable truth that what you put into the world tends to come back to you in some form eventually. Not always on your timeline, not always in a shape you recognize, but it comes back. My father put doubt into the world for 31 years. He directed it at me specifically, quietly, with the particular efficiency of someone who never needed to raise his voice to make a point land. And for a long time I absorbed it, not consciously. I wouldn't have admitted it then, but the way you absorb weather, you don't decide to feel cold. You just are. What I understand now is that his doubt was never actually about me. It was about a story he'd already written before I was old enough to have a say in it, a story where competence had a gender and belonging had a condition. He believed that story completely. He built his whole professional identity around it without ever naming it out loud. And when I walked into his world, his hospital, his hallways, his pre-op conference rooms, I wasn't just a junior colleague. I was a question he didn't want asked. So he answered it before I could ask it. Over and over, for years. The thing about deciding you don't need someone's approval is that it doesn't happen in a single moment. I've seen it written that way, in essays and memoirs, as if there's one morning you wake up free. That's not how it worked for me. It was slower. It was 9 days of preparation for a single surgery. It was 12 hours of surgical video in a university archive on a Saturday. It was sitting in a parking garage for 22 minutes, letting myself feel what I'd been filing away for years, and then driving home and making eggs and going to sleep. It was a lot of ordinary days, is what I'm saying. A lot of 4:45 mornings where I showed up not because someone had finally validated me, but because the work was there and I knew how to do it. That's the part that sustained me when nothing else did. Not ambition in the sharp, combustible sense. Something steadier than that, the knowledge that the work itself has integrity regardless of whether the right person is watching. Mr. DeLuca's valve replacement was going to matter whether or not my father was in the gallery. His wife was going to hold my hands either way. I think about that a lot, who you become when you stop performing for an audience that was never going to applaud you anyway. You don't become nothing, you become more precise, more honest. You start doing things for the right reasons, and the right reasons turn out to be quieter and more durable than the wrong ones ever were. My father said her technique is sound. Not to me, to someone else, in a hallway, after the fact. I won't pretend that didn't land somewhere. It did, but I noticed that what I felt wasn't relief. It was something closer to indifference, not the cold kind, but the free kind. The kind that means you stopped waiting. Dr. Restrepo told me to finish the paper. I finished it. Dr. O'Caffer put my name forward. My brother texted congratulations on a random Tuesday evening. These are the things I carry. You don't need the person who doubted you to become the thing they doubted you could be. You just need to show up, do the work, and let the record speak. The record always speaks, eventually, louder and more clearly than any conversation you could have forced. I have an early surgery most mornings. That's enough.